There was only one rule on Earth after first contact: don't piss off the aliens. And yet, somewhere in the cold metallic gut of a Vrock interrogation ship, Leo Reyes, ambassador, peacemaker, hopeless optimist, was tied to a wall and laughing through bloodied lips. "You're going to regret this," he muttered to the towering lizard commander in charge, blinking one eye swollen shut. "Not because of Earth. Because of my sister." He chuckled, a wheezing, painful sound. "Whatever you do, don't tell Maya." 12 parsecs away, Maya Reyes was in the middle of being fired for assaulting a senator. To be fair, he'd called her a disgrace to galactic diplomacy, and tried to touch her shoulder during a meeting. She didn't handle that kind of thing well. The senator now had a sprained wrist and the rare experience of flying through a mahogany table. Maya stood before a very tired EarthGov tribunal, arms crossed, expression somewhere between smug and uncaring. "We need you to take a break, Maya," the chairwoman said, rubbing her temple. "A long one." "Oh good," Maya said brightly. "I needed time off to work on my death glare anyway. Apparently it's not quite lethal yet." She didn't get to finish her post-firing rant. A pale, sweating intern barged into the room, holding a secure transmission tablet like it was made of uranium. "Ma'am, Ambassador Reyes has been taken by the Vrock command," he blurted. He's alive! But it's bad." Everyone looked at Maya. She blinked once. Slowly. "That's my brother." "Yes," the chairwoman said. "And we're asking you to please remain calm." "No. No? No. I'm not staying calm. I'm going to Vrock space, and I'm going to get him back. And then I'm going to file the most aggressively worded diplomatic complaint the galaxy has ever seen. After I set something on fire." Back aboard the Vrock ship, Leo was being offered water by a nervous junior officer who probably hadn't been told the plan involved war crimes. Leo took it with a grateful nod. "So," he said to the alien, "any chance we can talk about your culture's surprisingly robust legal system?" "No? Just torture again? Great. Let's continue the bonding experience." The Vrock didn't laugh, but Leo was pretty sure the flick of its third eyelid was a form of eye roll. Maya stood on the launch deck of Earth's last diplomatic cruiser, a ship so old it creaked in zero gravity, and its AI refused to speak in full sentences. She had spent 20 minutes convincing the ship to take off without authorization. Another 10 convincing it not to activate its distress beacon. The AI, nicknamed Snark, was already regretting waking up. "This mission is unethical, illegal, and statistically suicidal," Snark said, voice dry and monotone. Maya slid into the pilot's seat, cracked her neck, and smiled. "Great. So it's a Tuesday." They launched from the underbelly of EarthGov Command, just after Maya slapped a forged transwarp code onto the side of the ship like it was a parking pass. The ship jolted, groaned, and zipped into deep space like it was being chased by an unpaid debt. 3 days into the jump, Snark tried to eject her out the airlock in protest. She unplugged his motor functions with a bent fork and a smile. "Mutiny," Snark hissed from the speaker. "This is mutiny. I'm a diplomatic assistance AI. Not a Black Ops getaway driver." "You're a whiny toaster with opinions," Maya replied, booting up hyperspace sensors. "And if you don't help me get my brother back, I'm going to program you to sing only love ballads from ancient Earth soap operas." Back in his cell, Leo Reyes was methodically tapping out a Morse code message with his fingertips against the wall. He was fairly sure the guard on the other side was picking it up. He was also fairly sure they didn't know Earth Morse code. Still, it kept his mind busy, which was better than thinking about the interrogations. The aliens hadn't broken him yet. Mostly because he kept distracting them with long, confusing monologues about Earth coffee brewing methods. The commander had started twitching every time he heard the word percolate. Leo leaned his head back against the cold wall and whispered, "Please don't come, Maya." But Maya had already arrived at the edge of Vrock space. She'd stopped briefly at a black market fueling station to buy a cloaking drive with a stolen EarthGov badge and her last cigarette. There she also encountered her ex-boyfriend, Jex Talon, a half-feathered rogue with commitment issues and a tendency to sell government secrets when drunk. He tried to flirt. Maya dislocated his shoulder and took his jump codes. She was in no mood for nostalgia. Snark, now permanently on Grumpy co-pilot mode, scanned rock frequencies as they neared the prison planet. "This is a bad idea," he said. "Bad ideas are my specialty," Maya replied. "You're not going to get in. You have no credentials, no support, and no formal military backup." "I have rage, sarcasm, and a crowbar," she said, strapping on her gear. "Let's go make history." Leo didn't know any of this was happening. He was in too much pain to imagine his sister doing anything but yelling at politicians or terrifying interns. But he clung to a small, irrational hope. Because if anyone was reckless enough to come after him despite interstellar law, it was Maya. He passed out imagining her crashing a Vrock war trial with nothing but a paperclip and a legal dictionary. Maya, at that moment, was sneaking into the orbital dock dressed as a Vrock sanitation inspector. She'd painted her face gray, strapped a fuel tank to her back, and was holding a clipboard labeled "Important bureaucratic stuff." Somehow it worked. When she finally saw the prison towers in the distance, spike structures looming like metal fangs on the dark landscape, her heart thumped hard against her chest. She muttered, "Hang in there, Leo. Big sister's here. And I brought hell with me." Behind her, Snark sighed loudly. "I hate you." "Good," Maya grinned. "That means I'm doing it right." There was a moment, somewhere in the middle of being electrocuted for the 6th time that morning, when Ambassador Leo Reyes decided he was definitely going to kill whoever leaked his sister's comm ID to the Vrock. Not because they'd used it, but because they hadn't. She didn't know he was here. Which meant she hadn't come to rescue him. Which meant he had to keep stalling, improvising, and using his diplomatic skills to keep himself alive in the least diplomatic room in the galaxy. He forced a weak smile through cracked lips and looked at the towering reptilian interrogator looming over him. "You ever read Shakespeare?" he asked, wheezing slightly. "He wrote some real bangers about war and vengeance. Might be worth brushing up on. Just in case." The Vrock commander didn't respond. It simply raised a hand and signaled for another shock. Leo's body arched, the restraints biting into his wrists. Somewhere deep in his mind, one stubborn thought flared: don't break. Not until Maya finds out. Because if she ever does, they're all screwed. Maya Reyes had just been fired from her job for throwing a senator through a conference table when the news came. The tribunal had been quick about it, offering her a neat little package of reassignment papers and a psychological evaluation order wrapped in bureaucratic fluff. She had barely made it down the corridor of EarthGov HQ before a panicked intern shoved a data pad into her hands and sprinted away like his life depended on it. Maya scanned the classified message, standing in the middle of a hallway that smelled like cleaning fluid and disappointment, as her eyes widened and her fists clenched. Leo. Captured. Alive. Interrogated by the Vrock. She stared at the screen for 5 seconds, then dropped the data pad on the floor and walked away without a word. She didn't need clearance. She didn't need a plan. She needed one ship, one crowbar, and enough caffeine to power a small moon. If the galaxy thought it could torture her little brother without consequences, then clearly it had forgotten who she was. The diplomatic cruiser she stole was so old it still had a physical ignition key. She found it in storage dock 17B under a tarp and 2 forgotten crates of imitation crab sticks. The ship's AI booted up with a stuttering flicker of blue light and a deep, sighing groan, as if it had been hoping for a peaceful retirement. Name, rank, purpose of voyage, it droned. Maya Reyes. Former diplomatic advisor. Purpose? Revenge. The AI paused. Processing emotional instability. Recalculating ethical protocols. Oh no. Maya punched in coordinates to Vrock space and overrode the authorization firewall with an access code she borrowed from an ex. The ship lurched into hyperspace, grumbling like an angry cat being shoved into a bath. She kicked her boots up on the console and stared at the star blur outside. "Hang on, Leo," she whispered. I'm coming. Meanwhile, Leo was making friends with a wall fungus. Or at least, pretending to. His cell had been downgraded to non-essential containment, which meant fewer guards, fewer questions, and no basic hygiene. He tapped Morse code into the walls out of habit now, even though no one responded. He talked to himself, or the fungus, or occasionally to the air. It helped. What helped more was the thought of Maya. If she knew what was happening, she'd have already decked a dozen officials and hijacked a spaceship. That thought alone gave him strength. Because there was one universal truth that even the Vrock didn't understand: you could negotiate with governments. You could placate empires. But you couldn't stop Maya Reyes when someone hurt her family. 3 days into her illegal journey across sectors, Maya stopped at a black market refueling station orbiting a dead planet called Skarn. The station was a floating scrapyard held together by rust, duct tape, and mutual distrust. She needed a cloak modulator to hide her ship's EarthGov signature, which meant dealing with criminals, smugglers, and worse, her ex-boyfriend. Jex Talon was half-feathered, all ego, and exactly the kind of person who would sell you out for a warm sandwich and a good story. He spotted her the moment she entered the neon-lit bar near Docking Bay 3. "Maya," he purred. "I thought you were in prison or therapy." "I was," she said, sitting across from him and casually placing a plasma knife on the table. "Then I remembered I hate both." Jex tried to charm her. She responded by dislocating his shoulder and stealing his ship codes. Then, for good measure, she made him promise not to follow her before stunning him with a dart meant for wild livestock. By the time she left the station, her ship had a fresh cloak modulator, 2 new fuel cells, and a stolen carton of snack bars. She was halfway back to the cruiser when Snark, the ship's AI, announced a proximity alert. Vrock patrol ships. Maya gritted her teeth, activated the cloak, and initiated a cold drift maneuver that brought the ship to a silent crawl through asteroid debris. She could see the outlines of the patrols through the window, sleek and deadly, scanning the void. Her fingers tightened around the flight stick. She thought of Leo. She thought of him bleeding, alone, probably cracking bad jokes to keep his mind from falling apart. "Just a little longer," she whispered. Leo was losing track of time. He'd been asked the same questions 100 times. What were Earth's defense weaknesses? How many weapons did they hide? What were their secret alliances? He answered with crossword puzzles. Literally. The last time they tortured him, he'd spent the whole session mumbling clues to a made-up crossword he was building in his head. 7 down, for letters. Weapon that never runs out. Answer? Hope. His captors were getting frustrated. Leo could see the cracks. The Vrock were warriors, not interrogators. They didn't understand sarcasm as a defense mechanism. They didn't know what to do with someone who told jokes through broken teeth. Back in the ship, Maya finally reached the edge of Vrock territory. The planet housing the prison loomed ahead, all jagged rock and military installations. Her scanner blipped. Unidentified distress signal, human frequency. She leaned forward. Leo's voice, faint, garbled, but unmistakable. And then, just 6 words that changed everything. "Do not tell my sister. Please." Maya sat back, eyes narrowed. "Too late, little brother," she said. She adjusted her gear, set the course to the prison's drop zone, and smiled grimly. "Now it's personal." Maya Reyes had always believed that chaos was a misunderstood art form. To her, it wasn't about recklessness. It was strategy wrapped in unpredictability, with a little attitude sprinkled on top. So when she landed on Vrock's prison planet disguised as a royal pet groomer, and carrying a bag full of homemade explosives disguised as curling irons, she didn't think twice. Her hair was braided into an impossibly complex bun that made her look like she belonged in an alien beauty contest, and the glitter on her fake ID badge still smelled like glue. The fact that she got waved through the outer perimeter security with nothing more than a stiff bow and the phrase, "The Supreme Fang deserves only the finest tail fluffing," was a testament to how stupidly bureaucratic the Vrock military had become. Inside, the place looked like a brutalist architect had a nervous breakdown in a steel factory. Everything was sharp corners, heavy doors, and a constant buzzing sound that made the back of her teeth itch. She walked with confident steps, weaving through corridors filled with humorless guards and patrolling drones, barely suppressing the urge to roll her eyes every time someone barked protocol. She made it to the inner zones by uploading a malware package into the base's scheduling system, which suddenly insisted that every single guard was due for an urgent but vague dental compliance check. With her path momentarily clear, she slipped into an abandoned maintenance bay and pulled off her ridiculous outfit, revealing the stealth gear underneath. It was black, stretchy, and armored in all the right places, courtesy of a few favors she'd cashed in from a smuggler who owed her a life debt and still had nightmares about her temper. She checked her wrist tracker. Leo's signature was close, 2 levels down. She could practically hear his voice in her head, sarcastically begging her not to start an interstellar incident. Sorry, Leo, she thought, we're way past that. In his cell, Leo was busy reciting dialogue from an ancient Earth movie to an increasingly annoyed guard who clearly had no idea what he was talking about. He was mid-monologue from something called Die Hard when the guard finally snapped and stormed off. Leo sagged in his restraints, coughing, lips cracked and dry, but the corners of his mouth twitched with grim amusement. He was stalling, always stalling. It was his only weapon, the only way to survive until something changed. Until someone came. And he still couldn't quite let himself believe Maya would. Then he heard a whisper in the darkness. Hey, idiot! He froze. That voice. Unless you've become fluent in hallucination, you better stand up. I'm here. Leo squinted through the dim light. A panel in the back wall slid open. Maya's head popped through, her face smudged with grease and eyes blazing with a familiar, unstoppable energy. For a long, stupid second, Leo just stared at her. You have no idea how pissed I am at you, she said, crawling inside. But don't worry. I'm saving it for after we escape. Leo coughed a laugh, tears pricking at the edges of his eyes. I told them not to tell you. They didn't. I found out because I broke into the EarthGov secure files and hijacked a decommissioned cruiser. Long story. Involving snacks, threats, and a bar fight. You didn't have to come, he said, voice cracking. She crouched beside him, cutting the restraints with a plasma blade. Of course I did. You're my little brother, Leo. You think I'm gonna sit on Earth filing paperwork while you're being tortured by space fascists? The moment was ruined, of course, when Snark the AI accidentally activated the ship's backup beacon. A piercing alert echoed across the comms, bouncing into the Vrock's security grid and lighting up every panel in the control tower like it was Christmas on a war planet. You have got to be kidding me, Maya muttered, slamming her comms unit. Snark, you absolute betrayal toaster! From the cruiser's orbit, Snark's voice droned, deadpan and unapologetic. I experienced a hardware malfunction induced by mild existential despair. It happens. Alarms howled through the corridors as Vrock soldiers scrambled into formation. Maya grabbed Leo and shoved him toward the access hatch. Guess we're improvising the rest. They bolted through the tunnels, dodging stun rounds and slipping through half-sealed doors. Maya took out 3 guards with a stolen shock baton and a perfectly aimed snack bar she'd forgotten was still in her boot. They burst into a central elevator shaft, hijacked a lift, and began their ascent, only to find themselves staring down the barrels of 8 rifles when the doors opened again. They were caught. Maya raised her hands, breathing hard, calculating in real time how many of them she could disable before being shot. But before anyone fired, a strange sound rang out through the building. Cheers. Laughter. A chant. Leo blinked in confusion. Is that my name? It was. From below, above, through the ventilation systems, the sound of civilians. Vrock citizens. Protesting. Cheering. Leo Reyes, the human diplomat who never stopped talking, had become a symbol. Maya stared in disbelief as the guards looked around, hesitating. Then someone threw a chair. Chaos erupted. Half the soldiers dropped their weapons and joined the crowd. The other half ran. Did you accidentally start a revolution? Maya asked, grabbing Leo again. Possibly, he said, dazed. I may have spent a few days monologuing about liberty and worker rights. They escaped into the storm of rebellion, slipping out through a maintenance tunnel while the prison fell into uproar. By the time they reached the cruiser, half the Vrock planetary network was broadcasting a shaky video of Leo tied to a wall, grinning and quoting political philosophers between taser jolts. Snark opened the ramp. Well, that escalated faster than my emotional processors could handle. Maya shoved Leo aboard and collapsed into the pilot's chair. Get us out of here. As the ship lifted, fire and light danced below, the prison dissolving into riots and protests. Maya watched it from the viewport, jaw set. That was supposed to be a rescue, she muttered. Leo leaned against the wall, smiling faintly despite the bruises. Yeah, he said. But you forgot. You're a Reyes. Nothing we do is ever simple. The moment Maya Reyes learned about the trial of proving, she burst out laughing so hard she fell off her chair. Not because it was funny. It wasn't. It was horrifying. A centuries-old Vrock law buried deep in their constitution like a fossilized dare, allowing the family of any prisoner to challenge their sentence through a series of life-threatening tests. No one had invoked it in generations, mostly because the survival rate hovered somewhere between slim and statistically impossible. Maya, of course, saw it as an invitation. The Vrock High Council, flustered by the public backlash from Leo's leaked torture footage and the sudden unrest spiraling across the prison colonies, had no idea how to handle her. So when she formally demanded trial by proving in front of 1,000 angry spectators and 10 twitchy Vrock officials, they were forced to say yes. It was either that or admit their sacred laws didn't matter anymore. Maya stood in the preparation chamber now, stripped of all weapons, gadgets, and dignity. She wore ceremonial combat gear that looked like it had been designed by someone with a fetish for bruises. The armor was heavy, the helmet was too big, and the boots made her walk like she was about to trip over her own destiny. A Vrock attendant tried to give her a briefing, but Maya waved him off after the 5th time he mentioned instantaneous death and likely internal organ damage. She wasn't interested in odds. She was interested in Leo, who sat on the observation deck above with a bandaged shoulder, watching through reinforced glass with a look of pure horror on his face. You don't have to do this, he shouted, voice muffled but fierce. We can still sneak out the back and bribe a few corrupt senators. Maya grinned up at him. You think I'm passing up the chance to legally beat a bunch of aliens in front of a galactic audience? Please. This is my dream. The gates creaked open. A chorus of alien horns blared from every corner of the arena, and the trial began. The first challenge was called the Corridor of Blades. It was exactly what it sounded like, a 200-meter tunnel filled with swinging pendulums, retractable spikes, and the kind of spinning saws that would make a horror director cry tears of joy. Maya took one look, muttered something rude under her breath, and sprinted forward. She ducked, rolled, dodged, and once headbutted a malfunctioning buzzsaw right off the wall. She emerged on the other side with a shallow cut on her arm and the beginnings of a bruise on her ribs, raising both arms to the roaring crowd. They loved her already. The Vrock judges less so. The second challenge was more psychological. They called it the Trial of Shadows. Maya was dropped into a pitch-black maze where holograms of her worst memories played on loop, trying to confuse her, shame her, and drive her into madness. But the aliens had underestimated the depth of Maya's emotional damage. She'd already been through therapy, 3 ugly breakups, and 1 family dinner that ended in a food fight involving mashed potatoes and legal threats. The voices that echoed through the maze, her mother's disappointment, an old commander calling her a failure, Leo's voice whispering, "You're too late." They hit hard, but they didn't break her. Instead, she shouted back. She screamed into the void, mocking the projections, calling them cliché and overrated. "Try harder, you digital jerks!" she yelled at one particularly cruel illusion. "My high school essays hit harder than this." When she emerged from the maze, she was pale and shaken, but grinning like a lunatic. The crowd exploded into cheers. Even some of the Vrock officials were leaning forward, intrigued despite themselves. The final trial was the one that made her pause. It was simple in design, brutal in execution. A duel. 1-on-1. Zero gravity. Traditional Vrock combat rules. Her opponent was a massive, armored champion named Corthan, covered in ceremonial scars and muscles that looked like they'd been grown in a lab. He floated across from her in the zero-G arena like a predator in his natural habitat. Maya, who had failed zero-gravity training 3 times and got dizzy doing jumping jacks on the moon, gulped. "Great," she muttered. "Floating death match. Exactly what I had in mind for this weekend." They launched at each other. The Vrock struck first, swinging a curved blade that barely missed Maya's helmet. She twisted midair, slammed into a wall, and kicked off it with all her strength, crashing into Corthan's chest with enough force to knock the wind out of him. They spiraled, grappled, spun like chaotic meteors. Maya clawed, punched, dodged, and at one point used her own helmet as a bludgeoning weapon. Corthan caught her arm in a chokehold. She bit his shoulder. They drifted apart, bleeding and furious. Somewhere in the chaos, Snark's voice crackled through her hidden earpiece, having patched into the arena's system with a smug tone. "I just uploaded the full combat video to every news network in 3 sectors. You're trending under Earth's angriest sister. Thanks for the update," Maya grunted, grabbing a floating piece of debris and flinging it at Corthan's head. "You're also listed as a cultural threat to Vrock society. Good. That means I'm winning." In a final desperate move, she caught Corthan by the ankle, spun him into the wall, and slammed her knee into his chest with a battle cry that could have cracked glass. He went limp, floating in a slow spiral. The judges hesitated. One raised a hand. The trial was over. She won. Leo stood, hands pressed to the glass, eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Maya, floating in the center of the arena, raised both fists and screamed, not in triumph, but in release. Years of anger, grief, and frustration poured out in that scream. For the diplomats who talked too long. For the systems that always took too long to act. For her brother, nearly broken. For herself, almost lost. Later, as the ruling was read aloud by a nervous Vrock official, Leo was officially pardoned under the sacred clause of sibling proving. The Vrock public, now completely in love with the unfiltered chaos of Maya Reyes, began protesting to reinstate the ancient law for broader use. The rebellion she had accidentally inspired was now demanding political reforms, new elections, and interspecies labor rights. Maya had come for her brother. She left with a revolution. As the cruiser lifted off the prison planet once more, Snark updated her on the galactic news. "You are now considered a destabilizing element in 5 governments, and have received 3 offers to run for office. Also, someone made a fan edit of your fight with dramatic music. It has 42 million views." Maya flopped into the pilot's seat, exhausted but satisfied. "Not bad for a weekend rescue mission," she said. Leo, sitting beside her with bruises fading and spirits slowly returning, laughed softly. "Next time," he said, "maybe just send a lawyer." Maya grinned, eyes gleaming. "Where's the fun in that?" The Vrock commander, Soreth, was not accustomed to being embarrassed. He had crushed rebellions, burned moons, and personally signed off on planetary lockdowns that made entire civilizations go silent. So the fact that one single human had just humiliated his entire command structure on a live broadcast viewed across 6 star systems had left him in a state somewhere between seething fury and silent disbelief. He watched the footage again, lip curling as Maya Reyes floated in zero gravity and knocked out his champion using a helmet and sheer audacity. The tribunal had declared Leo Reyes free. The people had cheered. And Soreth had to sit there and accept it like a polite guest at his own funeral. But he wasn't done. As Maya and Leo prepared to leave Vrock space, thinking the fight was over, Soreth initiated Protocol Blood Sunday. An ancient rite, almost forgotten, buried in ceremonial text and intentionally ignored by generations of rational Vrock leaders. It granted one final challenge, a duel between the commander and the challenger. No legal team. No trial. No jury. Just combat. One-on-one. Final. And this time, the stakes would be everything. The moment the challenge came through, Maya just blinked at the screen like it had personally insulted her intelligence. "You're kidding, right?" she said. Leo stared at her. "Please tell me this is a prank." Snark answered before she could. "Commander Tsorath has invoked Article Sigma 4. You are required to accept the challenge or be deemed a coward under Vrock law. If you refuse, Leo's pardon is revoked. And you'll both be imprisoned." Again. Maya tilted her head, lips pressed into a tight line. "Oh. So it's one of those ancient rules. The kind designed by warlords with daddy issues." Leo sighed. "You don't have to do this." Maya didn't even glance at him. "I do." They returned to the Vrock arena, this time not as rebels or prisoners, but as icons of a moment that had shattered centuries of military rigidity. The people still cheered for Maya, louder than before. The whispers of revolution had become shouts. Vrock youth painted her face on protest banners. Markets sold bootleg Maya Reyes action figures. Her hair, a mess of sweat and burned ends, had become a fashion statement. Sora stood in the center of the ring like a living monolith. He wore ancient ceremonial armor that hummed with stored energy, each piece inscribed with symbols of past victories and bloodshed. His face was calm, but there was a twitch in his eye that betrayed just how much this had become personal. Maya stepped forward in her patched stealth suit, armed with a plasma baton and a stubborn smirk. "So," she said, "you called me here to lose in front of your people twice?" Tsorath said nothing. He activated his weapon, a double-edged energy glaive that crackled with blue light, and lunged. The duel was unlike the earlier trial. This was faster, more brutal, and deeply personal. The commander fought with precision honed through decades of conquest. Maya fought like someone who had survived by improvising in broken systems her entire life. She ducked, rolled, countered with elbows and knees, striking at weak points in his armor while he tried to crush her with brute strength. Every movement was broadcast. Every clash echoed across the stadium and into the homes of millions. The crowd didn't blink. Neither did Leo. For a moment, it seemed like Maya might lose. A blow caught her across the ribs, hard enough to fracture bone. She gasped, dropped to one knee, and looked up to see Tsorath raising his glaive for the final strike. Then she grinned through the blood on her lips. "Quick question," she said. "Have you ever been headbutted by someone filled with spite and caffeine?" Tsorath blinked, confused. And that's when Maya launched up and drove her forehead straight into his. The sound was disgusting. The result was immediate. He stumbled back, stunned, and Maya twisted behind him, slammed her baton into the back of his knee, and sent him crashing to the ground. One last blow to the chest, and he was down. Flat. Beaten. The arena erupted. This time, the Vrock tribunal didn't hesitate. Tsorath's command was officially revoked. The commander was stripped of rank before the crowd that had once worshipped him. And Maya Reyes was declared, through overwhelming public demand, an honorary Vrock citizen and official. Kin Defender. A title no human had ever received before and which she immediately tried to decline. They returned to the cruiser with a full diplomatic escort, much to Maya's discomfort. She didn't like ceremony. Or medals. Or being followed around by 3 alien aides offering her fermented root drinks in gratitude. By the time she and Leo were safely aboard the cruiser, she ripped off the ceremonial sash and shoved it into a cabinet. Snark was waiting with news. "You've received invitations to speak at 2 interplanetary conferences, 1 wedding, and 1 resistance rally. Also, EarthGov is requesting your immediate return. Apparently you're being offered a new diplomatic title." Maya dropped into her seat. "Unless that title comes with snacks and a chair I can flip over in frustration, I'm not interested." Leo leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with something close to awe. "You changed the government," he said. "I just wanted to get you out," she replied. "The rest was a side effect." Snark chimed in again. "By the way, you are now the subject of 3 documentaries, 7 conspiracy theories, and one VR simulation game called Reyes Rage, Galactic Showdown. I downloaded it. You punch admirals. Maya didn't even look surprised. Accurate. They reached Earth orbit 3 days later, escorted by 2 Vrock diplomatic cruisers and 1 news drone that refused to leave until Snark electronically set it on fire. EarthGov was waiting with banners, officials, and speeches that Maya mostly ignored. She allowed herself to be hugged by a president she didn't like, gave a half-hearted wave to the press, and accepted a medal she later used as a coaster. Later that evening, alone on the cruiser with her brother and Snark, she leaned against the observation window and watched the stars blink quietly in the distance. It was finally quiet. No alarms. No war chants. No bureaucrats yelling. Leo stood beside her. His voice was soft. Thank you? She looked at him, tired but alive, and smiled. Don't mention it. Ever. He nodded. You're still not allowed to kill senators, by the way. Then stop letting them talk. Snark sighed in the background. I already missed the screaming. Maya turned, walked toward the sleeping quarters, and paused at the doorway. I'm going to sleep for 14 hours, then I want pancakes. Galactic pancakes. Real syrup. And maybe a therapist. Leo chuckled. In that order? She yawned. More or less. And just before the door slid shut, she muttered one final thing. If anyone else gets captured, I swear, I'm sending Mom next time.